I called her up and said, "You want to come see a visit over at Abbey Road?" And she's like,
For years, George Clooney seemed untouchable, the silver-haired king of Hollywood, the man with the perfect smile, the perfect career, and the marriage the world loved to worship. But perfection is a story the public writes, not the truth people live. Behind the glamorous photos and red carpet elegance, something had been quietly breaking. Clooney had stayed silent through every rumor, every headline, every whispered prediction that fairy tales don't last. Until now, in a rare moment of honesty, he finally opened up, not with anger, not with denial, but with a confession that stunned even those closest to him. A confession that revealed what truly destroys a marriage built on admiration, distance, and unspoken fears. And the first crack in that perfect love story began long before anyone realized, before the silence. There was a beginning, and it was beautiful, long before the headlines and the rumors. George Clooney was a man who had sworn he'd never marry again. He had made peace with the idea of living alone, burying himself in film sets, charity work, and the easy freedom of a single life. And then Amal walked in, brilliant, composed, completely unimpressed by Hollywood. She didn't fall for the movie star. She saw the man. For the first time in decades, Clooney felt himself change. The bachelor walls he had built so carefully began to soften. Their conversation stretched until sunrise. Their laughter echoed through empty rooms that once felt too quiet. He wasn't looking for love, but love found him anyway. What he didn't realize was that the very traits that drew them together would one day be the forces pulling them apart. For a moment, it felt like a perfect life, almost too perfect. When George and Amal married in Venice, the world treated it like the ending of a fairy tale. But for them, it was a beginning. Quiet mornings together, long dinners without cameras, and a sense of partnership Clooney had never known before. Then came the twins, and with them, a new version of George, softer, more grounded, a man who finally understood the meaning of home. But success never sleeps, and neither did their schedules. Amal's global human rights work took her across continents, while Clooney's film projects pulled him back into the relentless rhythm of Hollywood. Slowly, subtly, the balance shifted. They still loved each other, but love needs time, and time was the one thing they no longer shared. And that slow drift was only the beginning of a far deeper divide. The cracks appeared quietly, almost politely. At first, it was just distance. Amal commuting between London and The Hague for high-profile human rights cases. Clooney anchored in New York and Los Angeles for film work. They promised it was temporary, just a season of busyness. But seasons stretch, and airports became their second home. Calls replaced conversations. Texts replaced laughter. Nights alone became routine. There was no anger, no dramatic fights, only two people drifting, too exhausted to notice how far they'd gone. Clooney once said, "Silence can be louder than shouting," and this was the silence that terrified him most. Friends noticed. So did the press. But George kept smiling, pretending the distance was manageable. What he didn't realize was that silence wasn't just creeping in. It was about to break wide open on a night that would change everything. The breaking point came on a night that should have been a celebration. At the 2025 Tony Awards, George Clooney walked in polished and smiling, the flawless Hollywood gentleman the world expected. But behind the tuxedo was a man who had been quietly unraveling, surrounded by friends, cameras, and endless champagne. Clooney slipped. After years of staying sober, he drank, not to party, but to numb. The tabloids framed it as a harmless, funny moment. Clooney gets a little too loose. But for Amal, watching from across the ocean, it wasn't funny, it was heartbreaking. Alcohol wasn't just a drink to her, it was a symbol of the old George, the man before growth, before fatherhood, before her. That night, she stopped laughing at the headlines, and Clooney, waking up alone the next morning, realized something terrifying. He hadn't just slipped, he had confirmed her worst fear, and the consequences were only beginning. What followed was the kind of silence that breaks more than it protects. In the weeks after the Tony Awards, George and Amal slipped into two different worlds. Amal retreated into her work in London, burying herself in lectures, court hearings, and humanitarian missions. Clooney stayed in New York, filming, attending meetings, and trying to act as if everything was normal. But the distance grew louder, their calls became shorter, their messages became formal. Even video chats with the twins felt scripted, as if they were performing the idea of a family instead of living it. Clooney began spending long evenings alone in their Provence home, staring at photos that felt like memories from another lifetime. Rumors of separation exploded across tabloids. Clooney didn't deny them. He simply didn't speak. Because sometimes silence isn't an answer. It's a confession. And that confession would become undeniable the moment Amal finally broke her own silence. When Amal finally spoke, the world leaned in a rare interview for glamour. She was poised, elegant, exactly the woman the world admired. But beneath her calm tone was something unmistakable. Exhaustion. She spoke warmly about George as a father, as a partner, as a man she deeply respected. Yet every compliment felt like a farewell wrapped in courtesy. She didn't mention divorce. She didn't mention distance. But she didn't have to. Her words carried the weight of someone holding on with fingertips instead of hands. When Clooney read the interview, friends said he went quiet for hours. For him, it wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't. He realized the woman he loved was grieving a marriage still technically alive. And as the world dissected Amal's calm honesty, George made a decision that would shock everyone. He would break his own silence, fully and finally. George Clooney's confession didn't come in a press conference or a headline-grabbing interview. It came quietly, sitting in a small studio in New York, far from red carpets and flashing cameras. He spoke with a softness no one expected. He didn't deny the distance. He didn't pretend everything was fine. Instead, he admitted the truth that had been shadowing their marriage for years. We didn't fall out of love. We just stopped meeting in the same place. He spoke about long flights, missed calls, and the kind of emptiness that grows when two people build meaningful lives, just not together. There was no anger toward Amal, only admiration and regret woven together like two threads pulling in opposite directions. And as the interview wrapped, Clooney looked down for a long moment before saying quietly, "I'm still trying. I hope she is too." What he didn't know was that the world wasn't done reacting, and neither was Amal. What happened next proved that some stories refuse to end quietly. Just days after Clooney's confession aired, the world waited for Amal's response, a statement, a correction, anything. But instead of issuing a press release, she did something far more revealing. She boarded a plane. Amal flew to New York unannounced, slipping past reporters and photographers, choosing privacy over spectacle. People close to the couple say the meeting was emotional, raw, and painfully honest. Two people who once fit together effortlessly now stood face to face, trying to figure out whether love could survive the lives they had built separately. No shouting, no dramatic walkouts, just the heavy silence of two hearts trying to find their way back, or trying to let go gracefully. When Amal returned to London the next morning, Paparazzi captured only one thing: a woman deep in thought. What the world didn't know was that a decision had already begun to form. Love doesn't break in a moment. It loosens slowly, thread by thread. After her quiet trip to New York, Amal returned to London with a heaviness even she couldn't hide. Those close to her said she threw herself into work again. But something had shifted. The certainty, the control, the unshakable composure. It all seemed dimmer. Meanwhile, Clooney escaped to their home in Provence, a place once filled with children's laughter and summer dinners, now echoing with a silence he couldn't outrun. Friends who visited said he looked older, not in years, but in spirit, like a man grieving something still alive. Yet neither of them filed anything, announced anything, or confirmed anything. It wasn't denial, it was hesitation. The kind that happens when two people still love each other, but aren't sure love is enough. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, a moment that would force them to choose. The moment of choice arrived not with drama, but with honesty. Faced with months of distance and a love worn thin by circumstance, George and Amal finally sat down. No lawyers, no advisors, no press. Just two people in a quiet room, looking at a future that no longer matched the life they once dreamed of. They talked for hours. Not about blame, but about reality. The careers pulling them apart. The children they both adored. The version of each other they still cherished, and the version they could no longer reach. Some say they decided to pause. Others say they agreed to rebuild slowly. But those who truly know the couple say this: they chose kindness over chaos, respect over resentment, soft truth over loud anger. And while the world waited for a headline, George Clooney whispered something that revealed everything. A single sentence that hinted neither at ending nor at staying.